those of you who are online, those of you in the building, thank you for joining us for worship today. We do have kind of two groups watching today, but we're just one family. We are the Experience family, and we are just happy that we can be together. We're happy that we have the technology that allows us to connect this way. And I just want to let you know that the equipment has started to arrive. The equipment that all of you helped make happen, fundraise, installations are beginning. And pretty soon we're going to be at the place where we're going to have an enhanced online and in-person experience. And it's exciting to think about. Yeah, thumbs up all the way. And thank you for all of you who contributed and who really, truly made this last year, 2020, so spectacular in so many ways. Vontris sent me the year-end tithe and giving report for our church, and we have had a record year in 2020 of all years, to think about it. So, and that's because you allowed the Spirit to work in your heart and move you towards God's will in your life. And that, for many of us, that turned into more giving. And we praise the Lord for that. So another exciting thing that's happened is we've signed a contract with a website designer, and that work has begun. And pretty soon, we're going to have a relaunching of the Experience website, which is going to enhance all aspects of our ministry. So great, exciting things are on the horizon for our little church family. And again, thank you to God, and thank you to all of you for your generosity and for allowing God to use you. Now, there are several ways that you can connect with us. We say this every week. We have our YouTube channel, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, and of course, our website, livetheexperience.org. The Facebook and Instagram is where you're going to see the most activities, the most announcements. So if you want to stay up on what's happening, make sure that you connect through those. But we want to interact. Those of us who are here in the building want to interact with those of you who are online. And we have a couple of questions that I want you to answer. But before we jump on those questions, I want to tell you how these questions came to me. I didn't come up with these really awesome questions. They actually came through my mother. My mother is a marriage and family therapist in Southern California. And during New Year's Day, we went out with the whole family. We took the girls out, kind of just trying to capture as many last minute memories as we can before they head off to school. And who knows when we'll see them again. And we were sitting at one of the piers down in Southern California near Newport Beach. And we were just reflecting about the year and life. And my mother, who has a very, very good brain in her head, she has to. She has a PhD. You don't get that so easily by being dumb, right? And she was telling us about some articles that she had read about the way people were looking at the New Year's and resolutions. And she said that she had read in an article something that made more sense to her when looking at the new year. And instead of talking about what's my New Year's resolution, instead of doing that, which seems so final, you say, I want to do this. And then if you don't reach that goal, then you failed in your New Year's resolution. And she was saying that a better question to ask is, what do I want more of? Or what do I want less of? And if you could answer those two questions for yourself, you have a much better chance of reaching smaller goals, but that are more attainable. So I want us to answer that question. So the first question is, what do you want more of this year? And if you have your Facebook app open, you want to go ahead and share that with the online community. What do you want more of this year? And for me, I want more creativity this year. I want to really exercise my creative juices this year and find ways of expressing that. So what do you want more of? And then, of course, there's the next question. What do you want less of? What do you want less of? And this is what I'm looking for less of, lethargy. I want to be more mobile. I want to be more active and be less sitting around. I've done enough of that in 2020. Can we do less Zoom meetings? Is that possible? Not sure. Maybe that's just part of our existence now. But so what do you want more of, and what do you want less of? We're going to start a new series this year, today. It's called Embrace the Tears. It's an awful title. It's an awful title for a series. It doesn't call anyone to want to be a part of it. Who wants to talk about embracing sadness? And you may not want to listen to the rest of this sermon. You may not want to listen the rest of these weeks, but this is an important topic if you ask me. And it's going to take us through a book that we don't pay much attention to in the Bible, the book of Lamentations. You can find that book after the book of Jeremiah. In fact, the reason it's put there is because many of the scholars believe that Jeremiah wrote the book of Lamentations. Most scholars agree on that. And what we're going to find in this book is really what the theme of the book is, which is the mourning of a nation that is on the verge of destruction, that is watching itself fall apart and disappear, and is mourning the losses. Historically, we're basically reading about the final moments of Jerusalem. You've heard me talk about the nation of Israel, that there came a point in their history that they said they wanted a king. And God told them that this was a bad idea, but they got a king anyway. And that moment led them down a path of just bad leadership and ultimately towards destruction and idolatry. And bad king after bad king sent them down a whirlwind of just bad moments. And now we have Jeremiah, or the author, watching and describing the complete destruction of Jerusalem. And this eyewitness tells us that it's a sad moment of despair for him and for the whole nation. It's a song of mourning. It's the wails of a broken and regretful people. Now, this book is constructed into 5 poems, and we've put them into 5 chapters in the canon. And it's desperation. It's hopelessness. It's the realization of a dire, awful situation. And this book has a lot to say to us today. A lot to say to us today. And I think we could spend the whole year diving deep into this book and learning week after week about how God wants us to deal with tragedy and misery and sadness and depression. But that would be too sad. We're going to spend 5 weeks on this book, but we're going to learn a lot about how we deal with challenging moments. How do we embrace the tears that we're experiencing today and that we will inevitably continue to experience as the world seems to be on a path towards destruction? But I promise you that as we go through this, and this is a promise that I'm confident will come through, we will see God's hand acting. We will see God come through for us during these tough moments, and there is going to be hope. Jerusalem was being attacked on all sides. On one end was Egypt. Egypt has always been a thorn in the side of the Israelites, starting from Exodus. And then on the other side, there were the Babylonians, who just were relentless. And ultimately, Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians, completely destroyed, and the people were taken captive. And look at how Lamentations starts in verse 1 of chapter 1. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow has she become. She who was great among the nations, she who was a princess among the province, has become a slave. The author can't believe what the city has become. The author can't believe what he is looking at. The first word in this verse is key. It's the word how. And it's more than just a statement. It's an actual question. It's the question that the author, that the prophet is asking. How did we get here? How did we arrive at this moment? How did we let this happen? How is it that God, our most powerful God, has allowed us to get to this moment where we have nothing, where we have despair, where we have destruction, where we have no hope? Did you have that question in your mind as you watch what unfolded in the Capitol this week? Did you ask yourself that question? I know I did. How did we get here? How did this country that all of us love, the country that enticed and invited my parents to come from South America for an opportunity, for education, for progress, for opportunities, for wealth, how did that country become this country? How did we get here? Let's interact again online with this, asking this question. How did you feel as you watched what happened at the Capitol this week? Put a 1 if you felt angry. Put a 2 if you felt scared. Put a 3 if you felt sad. Put a 4 if you felt concerned. A 5 if you felt happy. 6 if you felt confused, or 7 if you felt all of the above. Like Don said, it was just a tossed salad of emotions. And as a nation, we see that we have some huge issues. But let's take this to a more personal level. Are you looking at your life and asking the how question? How has my life gotten to where it is right now? How is it that I've gotten to this point? How did I let things get so out of control? Or maybe your how question is, how is it that God has allowed this to happen in my life? How is it that God hasn't answered my prayers the way I've wanted him to? How is it that God has allowed these things to happen to me? That could be your question. And the how question is deep inside of us as we deal with misery and pain and disappointment. And just like the poet writing this book, there are not satisfying answers to this question. There are not. And I'm not saying there is. The situation is awful. How could there be good answers? I mean, let's look at what Judah is experiencing. Let's go back to verse 1. It says, "How lonely sits the city that was full of people." Jerusalem, once the glorious city, the center of religion and power, now it sits empty and sad. And we can all relate to this reality, right? We can all relate to this reality. We've had that same loss because what we've experienced is a loss of connection. Where is everybody? Just like in Jerusalem, there's no people around. And now for us, where are all the connections that we've had? Where are all the important people in our lives that we were able to get with? Where are the potlucks that we used to have? Where are the picnics that we used to experience? What has happened that this building used to be full of people? And we would be out in the foyer drinking coffee together and visiting about life. We've lost connection, just like Jerusalem lost connection with one another. We had a brother who's part of the Experience family who landed in the hospital a couple of weeks ago. And normally in a situation like that, the church family, this family, the Experience family, would jump into action and do whatever it had to do to support a brother in need. We didn't do it this time. Not because we didn't want to, but because we weren't allowed to. See, the COVID regulations are saying right now that if you're in the hospital, you can only have one visitor per day. Now, I'm not saying one visitor at a time per day. I'm saying one visitor per day. If someone goes in the morning at 9 o'clock and leaves at 10, that will be the only visitor that patient will receive in the whole day. So from 10 a.m. till the next day, no one else is coming. And that made some huge restrictions on how we could support our brother who was in the hospital. And when I went, I stayed there for 6 hours. Now, I'm not complaining about that. What I'm saying is that I knew that if I left, no one else would be there to help and support my brother who needed help and support. And I want to take this opportunity to publicly thank Michelle, who spent hours and hours caring for our brother in the hospital. So thank you, Michelle, for putting in the effort that needed to be put in. And we've lost the ability to connect because of these tragedies, just like Jerusalem. But it's not the only thing that we've lost. Let's keep reading in verse 1. How like a widow has she become, she who was great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a slave. So not only did Jerusalem lose connection, they lost greatness. They were a great nation. Jerusalem was a great city. People came from all over to come and worship and experience God and experience wealth and experience prosperity. And now that was gone. Now the city was just ashes and forgotten, and nobody cared anymore. And as we look back, we see that here in America, we've suffered the same fate. America was always looked at as a great nation. And I believe it still is, honestly, personally. But I can't get out of my mind how much of the commentators I heard while everything was happening at the Capitol talking about how this is so similar to other nations that are fallen nations, that are struggling nations, and that we are looking like those failed states. And we're being compared to that, and the greatness of America has taken a hit. But let's take this down to a more personal level, something that makes a little more sense. What about your life? Maybe your life isn't as great as you've been wanting it to be. Wasn't 2020 supposed to be your year? Wasn't 2020 supposed to be your moment? Maybe you were going to graduate from college, from high school. You were going to get that promotion. You were going to meet the person of your dreams. 2020, that was the year. But that didn't happen. That's not happening. And we've lost greatness. But it's not the only loss. Like if that wasn't enough, let's keep reading verse 2. She weeps bitterly in the night with tears on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. So we've lost connection, we've lost greatness, and now we've lost relationships. Because the loss of connection leads to the loss of relationships. And now more than ever, relationships are so fragile. Relationships rise and fall on opinions about theology, about politics. And how much unfriending has happened on Facebook. I'm sure it's at a record high than ever before. And when we disagree, we only disagree on the edges and on the extremes of the argument. And anyone who doesn't think like me or who doesn't act like me can't be a friend with me and can't be in relationship with me. And the culture has created this reality that we can't listen to each other, and it's fracturing our relationships. So we lose. But there's still more to lose. Verse 3, Judah has gone into exile because of affliction and hard servitude. She dwells now among the nations, but finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. So after we lose connection, we lose greatness, we lose relationships, now we're losing freedom. We're becoming slaves because of our tragic existence. Have you felt it? We're slaves to cultural attitudes. We're slaves to diseases. We're slaves to our government. We're slaves to opinions. And it's holding us down. Jerusalem had the freedom to worship God as they please, to grow as a people, to grow as a nation. But what happened? Now they're under the rule of another nation and they have limited opportunities and resources. And that's where we are. Limited opportunities and resources. We can't come and go as we please. We can't do all the things we want to do. As most of you know, I have responsibilities at Barefoot Media Ministries as chaplain. And I'll never forget when I came to interview for this position in 2019. It just happened to coincide with the weekend that Parktacular was happening. Right? And I go over there and I was blown away by the scope and the size and the beauty of this event. The stage, the lights, the music, the people, the food. And that event, I'm not going to say that it made my decision to come here because I had already made the decision that I was going to come, but it definitely cemented it. But we don't have the freedom to do those events anymore. We can't. We want to. We want to give that experience to people. But in the midst of this tragedy, we've lost the freedom to do these kinds of things. And that's just one example. My daughter, she lost the freedom to go study abroad this year, so she was not going to do that. Many of you lost the freedom to go on vacations. You lost the freedom to go to work or go to school. And we continue to lose. But there's one more loss that I think is the most tragic of all the losses. Why is this guy calling me? It's verse 4. The roads to Zion mourn, for none come to the festival. All her gates are desolate. Her priests groan. Her virgins have been afflicted, and she herself suffers bitterly. So we've lost connection, we've lost greatness, relationships, freedom, and now we've lost celebration. We've lost the opportunity to come together and celebrate the good things in life. And why would you celebrate? We're in the midst of tragedy. We're in the midst of pain. We're in the midst of loss. That's where our focus is. Nobody celebrates in the middle of pain. And I'll tell you one celebration that is close to my heart that we have lost and that hasn't happened here at this church and in many other churches for several months. And I feel that some of us are really feeling the pain of it. It's worship. When we worship, When we sing, we celebrate who God is and what he has done in our lives. And we haven't done that here. We've lost that celebration. And I want you to know, bring you a little bit of hope that our worship leadership, our worship team is working to get that celebration back as part of our services here. And I'm hoping that it will be soon. So pray for them, that God can empower them and use them, and they can bring us something to celebrate as we come together. Because we need it. And I know I have felt the loss. And when we look at our reality, our tragic reality, the truth of where we are and what we're suffering, we want to assign blame. We started this conversation with the word how. And when we look at the word how and we want to understand how did we get here, it means that we're looking at who is to blame. How did we get here? Who's responsible for this tragedy that's happened? And here's the bad news. And here's what Lamentation presents to us as a possibility. That God is to blame. God is to blame. That God holds some responsibility for where we are. Because here's the truth. This is true. God has the power to unite us. God has the power to fix our problems. God has the power to deliver the solution to all of this. God has the power to bring a cure to a pandemic. God has the power to move in our politicians. God has the power to give you everything that you need for your life. That is not a lie. That is truth. But he doesn't do it. And that is the hard part. God can do it, but he doesn't do it. And now we're in the journey of trying to understand why. Why, God? Why don't you come through right now in this situation? And what I'm going to share with you as we go through this book is not a magic pill. What I'm going to share with you is not the answer. Because what tragedy brings to us sometimes is more questions and very few solutions. So, great topic, Pastor, to choose to start the year with. Look what the author says. Lamentations 1:12, he says, "And you, passerby, look at me. Have you ever seen anything like this? Ever seen pain like my pain? Seen what he did to me? What God did to me in his rage?" In the author's mind, God is to blame. God's anger is to blame for the pain and the suffering that they are going through at this moment. Let's explore this question. I'm going to throw a question up, and I'd like you to answer it online if you can. How much of your troubles do you blame God for? How much of your troubles do you blame God for? Put a 1 if all of them, put a 2 if some of them, and put a 3 if none of them. And if you're feeling that God is to blame for the losses that you have experienced in your life, I want you to know something. Pay attention, look at me. It's okay to feel that way. If Lamentation teaches us anything, it's teaching us that the emotions that we have are not condemned by God. And if you feel that God is to blame in part or completely for the struggles that you're having, it's okay to feel that way. God hasn't condemned you, and God hasn't stopped loving you, even though you're mad at him. Those of us who have children, we understand this reality. Sometimes, maybe all the time, you cause your children frustration and pain. You do. And your children sometimes look at you as the source of their frustration and pain. And depending on the character of your children, the way God wired them, they will remind you of how they feel about you during these tough moments. Sometimes they'll roll their eyes, give you the silent treatment. Sometimes they take it even further and might be disrespectful, might yell at you. Those things happen. And depending on the kind of parent you are, you might let it go, or you might take more punitive measures. But no matter what your child does, no matter how your child feels about you, no matter how much blame your child puts on you for their pain, the one thing that never changes is the amount of love you have for that child. You can't stop loving that child. You know why? Because you can't help it. You are a loving parent. And God is no different. And the emotions that you're feeling right now, the blame that you're assigning to God, has not put a dent in God's love for you. So, what do we do when we're frustrated with God? What do we do when there seems to be no solution to our problem and God isn't coming through? Well, I want to suggest to you two things that are not the solution. They're just the first steps towards a better understanding of what God is doing in your life. The first one is found in verse 7 of chapter 1. Here it is. In the midst of her sadness and wandering, Jerusalem remembers her ancient splendor. When you're in the midst of tragedy, when you're in the midst of the struggle, when you don't understand why God isn't coming through for you, this is the moment where you have to look back. Don't look forward because the forward doesn't look so good right now. Don't look in the present because the present is a current struggle. Look back and remember how God has come through for you in the past. One of the things that I love to do in my own personal spiritual journey is journaling. I don't know how many of you are journalers. I know it's not for everybody, but I am. And the beauty of journaling is what it allows you to do if you save your journals is to go back and pick a journal up maybe from a few years ago and read it. And if you do that, you start noticing the journey that God has taken you on. And you realize like, wow, I have grown so much from that moment to this moment. And it's in the midst of these tragedies that this author realized we have to look back on the days when things were good and remember what God did for us back then. We don't know what God's doing right now. In fact, right now it looks like God isn't doing squat, but he's acted in the past. And that reminder can get you through some tough times. So that's the first step. And then the second step is probably the hardest step. And it's found in verse 20. Lord, see my anguish. My heart is broken and my soul despairs, for I have rebelled against you. In your pain, in your loss, even in your blaming of God, you still have to make a move towards God. And that makes no sense. The one that I'm blaming for this, the one that I think is hurting me, I have to go to him? Yes, because God is still the best option. You see, I entered 2020 excited about my future. I entered 2020 with so much hope about what God was going to do in my life, in the life of my church, in the life of my family. I was ready to soar. And then everything got set on fire. And I looked at God and I said, what are you doing? And that would have been the perfect moment. Anybody would have looked at that moment and said, Milton, this is the time to go in a completely different direction. That obviously isn't going to work. Change your career. Don't be a pastor. Don't even believe in God anymore. He didn't come through for you. And everybody would have been like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense on a logical level. And for a while, I wasn't going to give up what I thought I was supposed to be doing, but for a while, I wasn't sure how this all was going to work out, and I was down. But it's when I said, no, this is where I have to dedicate more to my relationship with God. This is where I have to dive in deeper with Him. I don't like what He's doing right now, but I know that the best solution is with Him. Not with any other leadership, not with any other person, with God Himself. And I know that doesn't feel good because He's the one who's hurting me right now because He isn't coming through. But the author recognized it. He said, you're the one. Your wrath is hurting me, but I'm reaching out. And that's where we are. So in the midst of this tragedy, in the midst of the misery, in the midst of the tears, the start of our journey with God is to remember what He's done for us and to dive in deeper with Him. And if you do those two things, it doesn't mean the misery is over, but it means your path out of it has begun. Father God, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to have these feelings and loving us anyway. We don't know what you're doing. We're confused about it. Sometimes we even blame you. Help us to understand what's happening. But in the meantime, to just take that first step and to dive even deeper into this with you. We're suffering, but we're ready to go through the suffering with you. Thank you again. In Jesus' name, amen.